Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's In the Know podcast, where I have a very special guest with me today, as I'm delighted to welcome George Kinder, recognized as the father of the life planning movement and author of multiple bestsellers. George, a very warm welcome to you to my humble podcast.
Great to be here, James.
Great. So today we're going to be talking about your early influences, the origin of life planning, and also, interestingly, take a glimpse into the future. And you've also very kindly agreed to answer questions from the audience, which I've got in front of me. So I think that will be of particular interest and a bit of fun as well. And I'm genuinely looking forward to our conversation today, George. But the first question that I have for you is, before we get into the early years, is when I announced that you were a guest on the podcast, the comments I received publicly and privately were phenomenal. And words like a living legend, an inspiration, changed my life and that of my clients. And my personal favorite, he's the Messiah, which I found interesting. So when you hear what people think of you, how does that make you feel?
Well, that's incredible, James, and I feel as if I've done something. I can't believe it, first of all, but it makes me feel as if I've accomplished something, and something that I wanted to accomplish. But you never know. You never know in life if you actually will, if people will see you and get something from you. You have this interaction with them and it's brief. And so it makes me feel like I've done what I needed to do, which is fantastic. Thank you for that.
That's great. It was very warm and it's very genuine as well, what people wrote. And, I wanted to make those comments, at the start, because they're really warm and they're genuine and it's authentic. And I thought it was a great way to start the podcast.
Beautiful.
Okay. Let's talk about your early influences then, growing up, the origin, etc. And I want to talk a little bit about spirituality as well, which forms a large part of what you do. But can you just give us a bit of an insight in terms of the formative years and the early years?
Yeah, sure. Well, if we go all the way back, I grew up in a rural town in Ohio on the West Virginia border. And but my parents were educated. So our home was filled with books. They were Christian. So my mother was a mystic in a way, and my father was more of a, strict and by the books, ethical virtues and that kind of thing. And, as a kid, I would have mixed feelings about what they were standing for. But when you talk about kind of spiritual stuff and where my origins might be, we had 13 acres of field behind our house. And I loved being out there. I felt like this is home to me. This is where I was meant to be. And I didn't realize, maybe until you're asking me this, that was really a profound spiritual time for me, a profound spiritual experience. But ultimately it came through, I don't know if you know my last set of books, but I've just completed in the last 2 years, 5 books that were accomplished over a 30-year time frame, and I just raced to finish them. And they go at each day of the year from January 1st to December 31st. And on every day of the year, I tried to capture some essence of it through poetry and photography. And so it's available for free on Substack, as well as some advanced, Substack things and whatever. Anyway, and so and it's about mindfulness. It's about living in the present moment and what nature can teach us in that regard. So those were early influences.
Sounds great. It sounds a wonderful experience. And whereabouts are you based now then? Because do you spend your time in Hawaii and the UK and other places in America? Where is your home, if you have one?
I suppose. Where I am right now is in Massachusetts. Yeah. And the book that I wrote was because our the land that we live on goes out, it's an acre and a half goes out into a lake, a small lake. It's called Spectacle Pond. And so it's a beautiful part of nature and part of the world in Massachusetts, not far from where Thoreau wrote Walden Pond, very close, in fact. And then we live part of the year in Hana, and we love the UK. So we're there in London, certainly many weeks out of the year, and now in Cornwall as well. So we get around, but primarily we go to particular places and just thrive in them. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And do you enjoy London? Because that's completely different, isn't it? I mean, it's a bustling city. I guess you don't have the countryside or the greenery, etc., but you still enjoy coming over to the UK.
Yeah, but London has culture, and it has multicultural experiences that it can't be matched, really, for an English-speaking person. Can't be matched. It's a wonderful experience. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And just go back to your early influences. I'm interested to know about the early years in terms of your career, because I read that you were, I think it was a tax advisor, or you were progressing to that, and that wasn't quite fulfilling enough. So maybe you can just give, perhaps for the people that don't know that much about you, how did you sort of get into financial planning? What was your journey into that?
Yeah, well, it's very similar to how I ended up creating life planning, because the way I got into financial planning, I was doing tax returns for a living because it was something I could do just a few months out of the year, and the rest of the time I could do whatever I wanted. And at that point, I knew that I wanted to be an artist as well as to have a lot of nature and mindfulness spirit in my life. And what happened? So I was doing tax returns, and I was very good at it. I was very good at mathematical things all along, and I'd studied economics at Harvard, so I had a natural understanding kind of interest rates and those kinds of things that became very helpful as I went into financial planning. But all along, it wasn't what I really wanted to do. What I really wanted to do was either write poetry or, live in mindfulness in some way. But no one would pay me for it, So I had to make a living somehow. I know, isn't that terrible? So it's actually made me think a lot about civilization and how civilization works. And does civilization naturally lead us into places where we thrive with freedom? I don't know I've got a lot of thoughts about that. We might explore that later in the talk. But what I do know is that I got into financial planning because I wanted to be free. Mm. And I thought, if I know how money works, maybe I can use money to deliver freedom to myself. And then what I realized was that all of my clients, they didn't want to be artists or spiritual necessarily, but every one of them had something they wanted that they weren't realizing. And I thought, oh my God, there's something here that I can learn something myself and then teach it to others. And so that's how I developed life planning. I was passionate about living a life of freedom myself.
Yeah. So it was your experience, we call it now the lived experience, and you were looking for freedom. Yeah. And what year are we talking about when you would say that, you had fully developed the life planning course and you had gone through that process? What year are we talking about?
Well, I developed it. I mean, I was developing it all along, and from the beginning of my financial planning career, I was asking profound questions. So I was already beginning to do it and knowing that somehow what was more important for my client than investing in the right things or having the right structure to their retirement or the right risk management, profile and all that. I realized that what was most important to all of them was living their own lives as they defined it in freedom. And so early on, I started asking profound questions. And so that was I got my financial planning. I got a CPA degree, I think in 73, 74. I was studying financial planning in the late 70s and beginning a real practice of it in the early 80s. already asking those questions. And in the early 90s, I was talked into speaking at a national conference by my girlfriend at the time, who said, "You've got something to say. You better get," she saw a flyer on one of the national conferences here and says, "You got to speak there." So I did. And what I found natural enough to speak about was freedom, and people took to it. So I suppose it was around that time that I had developed life planning. But even then, the book that you've got behind, I can see it behind you. You've shown it to
yeah.
The 7 Stages of Money Maturity. That was the first book. And it was a book that influenced the financial planning community greatly. I began to create workshops from that book, and people from all over the world began to study with me. But I realized that they weren't actually doing life planning. They weren't actually freeing their clients. They were trying, in some ways, to be more of a psychologist than a what I now call a life planner or a financial life planner. So shortly after writing that book in 2003 or 4, I kind of shook my fists at one of the people I'd trained and said, "You're not doing it." And she said, "Well, what do you mean? Tell me how." And I outlined in about 5 minutes the process that we now use that's called Evoke, which is a process of listening, of visioning, of solving obstacles. And then we created a workshop out of that. So that's kind of the process. It was over 20 or 30 years, really, that it developed. Yeah.
It's been a long time. And for the people that don't know, what would you say life planning is in its purest form?
In its purest form, it's what has to be done before you do the financial plan. In other words, you can't do a financial plan without knowing where you're going. And you can't know where you're going without really listening deeply to the client. And there's a particular kind of listening that is, where it's not asking questions, but it's more silence, much more silence than question oriented. And then catching the emotional tones so that you provide either empathy or you're supporting aspirations and inspiration. So it is the goal area. It's the intimate area. It's knowing who the client is. That is the purest life planning piece. I think of life planning as the whole thing, including the finances. But the purest piece would be just that one bit of really knowing the client well.
And with all the years that you were developing this, refining it, talking to people, what did you learn about yourself going through that process?
I think what I learned that maybe I knew all along, but it really reinforced it all, was that a passionate purpose is everything. Mm-hmm. But with if you've identified your passionate purpose, and I don't mean we just have one necessarily, and some people, it doesn't feel like they have one at all, but you can actually come up with something through a process of inquiry and engagement. But a passionate purpose carries you through life in a phenomenal way. It delivers into the world everything that you're meant to be.
And when you were developing the course, George, because you say, you were delivering this to the financial planning community, were you faced with skepticism about whether this would work? And why not just focus on promoting a product or a pension or an annuity or whatever it may be? Because what I'm seeing now in the market is things are changing. And it's almost what I see now is people adopting a different approach now. But we're talking like 20, 30 years ago. So I'm just trying to understand what the market was like when you were developing this, and what other financial planners or financial advisors, what was their reaction to it?
Well, I could divide it easily into the two camps, and it could be the product-oriented camp and the camp that was oriented more toward advice. And the product-oriented camp pretty much mocked it. I was on the cover of the Wall Street Journal My picture was on the cover of the Wall Street Journal from writing that book that you have behind you. And in that article, they mocked me. But there's a saying that bad publicity is good publicity, is great publicity. Yeah. And it actually really helped. There were a whole bunch of people who came to me going, that journalist didn't get it, did they? And that helped launch it. But in the advice community, the kind of the elite within the advice community, and by that I mean the leadership of the advice community in America, became passionate very quickly about this approach, because they'd already discovered that the essence of planning was listening, and that what clients really wanted was not the money stuff. They wanted their own lives, and they hadn't figured out how to put those two things together. So they saw me as someone who had figured that out, and that was incredibly valuable for them. So for 13 years in a row, the early workshop that I did, the 2-day 7 Stages of Money Maturity workshop, and now I think I've got a much more sophisticated workshop and more exciting workshop. But that workshop was a pre-workshop to the FPA, the Financial Planning Association Conference in America, for I think 13 years in a row, with hundreds and hundreds of people coming through it and carrying it to all over the world, to 30 countries. Yeah.
You've mentioned listening a couple of times, and I find that a particular hard skill. And I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because even now I'm talking to you, I believe I'm listening, but I'm also thinking, okay, think about the time, think about the question, make sure there's a link, etc. So what's your advice with regards to listening and actually being present and becoming better at listening for people like me who probably struggle with that because you're always thinking about something else?
Right. I mean, that's really what my trainings are all about. And so come to the 5-day
come on the course. Yeah.
The Evoke course, which is the thing I'm most proud of, probably, of all the things I've done. So what I want to say, though, in seriousness, I mean, I'm very proud of that course, and I don't know of a better course for listening. But what I want to say to everybody is you can learn it. It's not something that came naturally to me, even. I was a math guy. Seriously, I was off the charts mathematically, and verbally, my skills were very, very low in my in my early days, in my university days. So it's something that you can learn, and there are multiple ways of doing it. I mean, you can learn it through by studying counseling in some way, but the main thing is to learn it, I think, without language, so that you're learning how to respond with empathy, even though you're not saying anything. And if you're able to do that, your client will read that, or your spouse will read it, or your best friend will read it, and they will just keep going and going and going. They'll keep talking because they'll see that you're supportive. And the two skills are really empathy. And then the other one is seeing what it is that is inspiring the person and getting a little excited around it. So the person sees that you also get that. And then they want to talk more and more and more. So I think that listening is the most valuable skill in life planning. And there's one other theme, which I know you're interested in from just the little bit we've engaged before, and that is mindfulness. That in all of my trainings, I've used mindfulness. And this has also been something that I've kind of learned over the years and been stunned by as a way of inner listening. So we listen to each other. You and I are listening to each other and engaging with each other. But the more that we practice mindfulness, the more we're able to let our self-thoughts go. So what you were talking about is all those thoughts going on while you're listening. And the more that you practice mindfulness, the easier it is to let them go. Because usually they repeat themselves again and again, right? And you yourself a minute ago, you were going, oh, I've lost my train of thought, where was I? And that's perfectly legitimate in any conversation to do that, but we don't realize it sometimes. We don't give ourselves permission. So mindfulness is terrific because You know what mindfulness is? People don't realize this, and you'll never read this in the press, but it's what my latest book, this book that's just coming out, The Three Domains of Freedom, is a third of it's about. Mindfulness is about the mastery of the present moment. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And the present moment is the only moment we ever really experience. It's also the only moment we ever experience freedom. I'm going way too far afield on this, but in any case, mindfulness is a great exercise as well to help us learn how to listen, because we first listen inside ourselves, letting our self-thoughts go, and then we're more present for whoever we're with.
I think we're certainly not going too far. So I think this is great, because somebody else said, all we have is now.
That's it. Yeah.
We don't have the future. When we look at the future, we look at it from now. When we look at the past, we look at it from now. So what we have is now. And I wanted to ask you what mindfulness is, because I think there is different definitions. Yeah. But that inner listening, I think, is important. And I think people are starting to do more of it, George. And I don't know if it's because I'm the age that I am and what I'm doing with these podcasts and talking to people, but I do feel that people are looking for a little bit more. And I'm obviously seeing different business models, et cetera, in terms of how they want to deal with clients. But I think things are changing and we're becoming more aware. But that's what I'm seeing. Are you seeing the same thing or not?
Yeah, very, very much. I mean, it's all taking place in a civilization that's filled with turmoil at the same time. That's very troubling. But yes, on a societal level, in terms of individual people, where people are moving, there's no question there's a tremendous growth of both interest and practice of mindfulness, and of being present, of being right here, right now. Just going to be very helpful. One hopes. Yeah.
I think it's hugely important with what's going on in the world anyway. And with regards to life planning, how many countries is life planning in? How many people have been trained in it, etc.?
I think it's, Laura knows in my office, but it's at least 3,000. It's probably close to 4,000 people. It might be twice that. I'm not sure. But it's, so it's thousands of people that have at least taken the 2-day training that we have. And that's in 30 countries. It's on all continents, all but Antarctica. So if anybody's listening and they're from Antarctica, please get in touch. I might give you a special deal on it. But so it's all over the place, and people take to it. At first, just like you were asking earlier, I think that probably came from, kind of seeing people skeptical about this kind of thing. At first, in every culture, there's a skepticism to it. What do you mean? Money's about people, money's about selling product. It's all about greed and arrogance, or it's all about facts and figures, or it's all about laws and legal skills. And so we've created a different notion. And in every culture, people have gotten excited when they realize that no, you can actually work with a model that is primarily human centric.
And is life planning for everyone? Because I'm looking at it from my perspective at my time of life, and I'm like, right, okay, these are, and we'll talk about the 3 questions. Yeah. But I look at my son, who's almost 20, and I'm thinking, would life planning also suit him? Because his goals, his aspirations, he's just finding his feet, his purpose. So my question is life planning for everyone?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you ask, and people have debated over time and asked. Some people say, well, it's not for engineers, that's for sure. And then I'll run into another person whose specialty is engineers, and they love life planning, and they say, are you kidding? These engineers are eating it up. And so similarly for age, I created this in my 20s. I began to look at it in my 20s. So I think of it as being ideal for young people, because it's when we're young that we're trying to figure out, where do we want to go? Who do we want to be? How do we want to engage? And civilization feels much too large for us in some way to navigate, to figure out. So finding questions that touch your heart can help. And the thing to realize with young people, as well as with old, is that you don't have to hold to your answers to these deep questions. Next year, they could be changed entirely. 3 months from now, they could change. And that's fine. There's a tendency for them to stay. But if they change, a great advisor is there with you, totally with you as they change.
Yeah. I think that I'll talk to my son about this, and I'll let him have your book as well, because I think it's truly fascinating. And I'm going to turn my attention to those 3 questions because I watched, I think you present this in a video online, and I went through the questions myself. I thought, well, why not? Got a bit of time. So I did the first question. I thought, yeah, that's okay. I'm all right with that one. And then it got deeper. And then we got into the second and the third. And the third one, I was like, right, okay, I'm beginning to struggle here. But those 3 questions, what was the inspiration and the thought process specifically around those 3 questions, and the process that you came to actually, finally commit to those 3?
Well, it's interesting. It took a period of perhaps 10 years, maybe longer. And even, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, I was tweaking a word or a tense of a verb or something to make it work even better. As I said early on, I had a passionate purpose, and civilization was saying, you can't do that. So I was ticked off, and I wanted to find a way to inspire myself to figure out how to do it anyway. And then as I figured that out, I wanted to help other people. So the question for me was, how do I get at my own passionate purpose, and how can I help someone get at theirs? So that first question, as you're saying, is, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do? And we pretty much all of us could do it, because we've all fantasized winning the lottery. And, as kids, we fantasized going to Disneyland. And so, there are these kind of things that we do naturally as human beings. And the second and third question are deeper and more challenging for many, but also clarifying. And both of them involve our mortality. The second one is you only have 5 to 10 years left to live. And so what would you do differently? How would you live your life? And often people turn more toward relationships. They get more clarity than just this wild, I got all the money, I can do anything. And so that's a wonderful thing to see a client go through, and to see them turn to that level of seriousness. And that's one of the ways that we create a great conversation with them. Although I will say that I do a whole hour or 2 of listening before I get to the 3 questions with the clients. So I build trust by really being interested in them through great listening. The third question is the most profound one, and it's, going to the doctor and them shocking you with the knowledge that they'd misdiagnosed that you only have 24 hours left to live. They've got a rare ailment. And the question is not what would you do, but reflecting on your life, what did you miss? What did you not get to do? Who did you not get to be? And for most people, it's in the answer to the third question that the life plan emerges. For some people, like you mentioned, it was difficult. And for some people, maybe 10% of the audience, the client base, it'll be the second question. Or it'll be found in other avenues of inquiry. But the third question, because it touches on, what did you miss? Right now, in this moment, life's gone. What did you miss? Who did you not get to be? And you go, wow, I didn't get to write that novel. I didn't get to do that film. I didn't get to travel to, Hawaii. I didn't get to really be with my children as they grew up. And so those things all suddenly, if it's the children, it means it's time to spend more time with them. And so you just shift to the present moment on each of these things. And in life planning, what we do is we inspire our client to deliver on that third question or on the second or some mix of a variety of questions in very short order. So our clients are launched in a matter of weeks. And often they've accomplished huge elements of the life plan within months. So, yeah.
I mean, I've been through those questions. I do think they're very profound. It makes you think.
Yeah.
But it also made me think that if the advisor was in front of me, there's also got to be, we've talked about that empathy and trust.
Right.
Because I guess you want people to live and breathe life planning, and it's not just a way of making money, etc., using manipulation or psychology. You have to live and breathe this, because there's a lot of advisors still at the moment. They'll give you a risk profile and say, well, off you go. That's not deep enough. That's not going to satisfy my aspirations of where I want to be. Right. But I guess that trust is pivotal. Absolutely. With you, the advisor, and the client. But you have to listen. You have to get this out of people, because I have quite a queer relationship with money, and I react in certain emotive ways. Right. But I guess you are wanting an advisor to listen. Yeah. And for me, just to go blah, and then to pick on certain points from that.
Right. Well, you've tapped onto something very important that we haven't touched on, and it's related to listening. And it's one of the reasons I love this, what I call the Evoke, or it's a 5-day online, it's a 4-day program. And it's because not only is it the trust that comes from great listening, but it's the trust. Clients read us, and it's subtle. They might not be able to articulate it, but they can tell how authentic we are around them and around this issue of life planning, about living your life. If you're kind of coaching them to live their life, but you're really secretly, you're not into it, you don't agree with what they're doing or anything like that, they can read you. And it doesn't work. And even if there's a little bit of that, it's not going to work. So what we learned early on was that if you're going to be a great life planner, you need to be living your life plan. So, in fact, what's best is you need to be life planned, so that you experience every piece of that. You experience the listening, you experience the visioning, you experience going through the obstacles, you experience every bit of it. And in this course that I'm most proud of, it works inside out. So you're trained as an advisor. You come in and you have a partner, and you life plan them. You practice through the 5 days life planning them, and they life plan you. So when you leave, you have all these skills as a life planner, but you also, the thing that's most amazing is you're launched in your own life. The things that you've held back from, you're launched into. And so that's right on. Yeah.
Is there one story you could share where you've really transformed someone's life, a client's life, etc.? Is there something that really resonates with you?
Gosh, there's so many. Two of them immediately come to mind around the leadership. Two people who were in the leadership of the Financial Planning Association in America, and one of them had held back from spending time with their 10-year-old daughter, and they were working 60, 70-hour week, and they felt they had to, and we challenged them around that. And this was in a 5-day training, and we challenged them and said, and they said, no, my boss wouldn't stand for it. And I said, how do this? But who are you? Isn't this who you really are? Being a great dad and being really connected with your kids. And so we helped them construct this dialogue with their boss and construct, plan B, right? Yeah. And plan C. So it was all set up so that they were going to win no matter what. And they got their hours down to a 40-hour week, and the rest of that time they were spending with their their kids and their spouse, where apparently there were some issues as well. So it was just fabulous, like them coming alive again. And the other story was with a person who became the head of the Financial Planning Association, and he came through the 5-day program, and what he longed for was a ranch, living on a ranch. And he thought he'd get it in retirement, which he figured was good, 20 years away. And so we got him down to 15, and then we got him down to 10, and then we got him down to 5. And then we challenged him around, hey, man, this is who you are, right? Would you live with more energy and vitality if you had this? Would your career take off much more richly if you had this? And he said, yeah. He said, well, how about in the next, year and a half? So we did that, and then he left the program and came, and he I don't remember whether he called me or he sent me an email, but I learned like 10 days later, he sent an email to everybody who was in the program, and he said, I just signed the contract to buy the ranch. Wow. I'll be living there in 2 months. And
that's fantastic.
So those stories are common. Pretty much everybody is missing something. It may seem very small and insignificant, but to you as an advisor, but to them, it means everything. It's phenomenal.
Well, it's finding that freedom that we've talked about as well. And if I was just to move the conversation on slightly towards that, and then start the future gazing, because the buzzword at the moment is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And that is advancing at a huge rate. And I find it hugely interesting in terms of what it could do. And one of the benefits could be freedom. It's going to give us more freedom to do different things. But before we get into that, what's your view on artificial intelligence? Are you in favor of it? Slight concerns? Where do you sit on this?
I think it's very interesting what's happening in civilization, the debate that's going on. And that's independent of what I think about artificial intelligence. Mm. I think it's fabulous. I think it's absolutely fabulous. That said, if you have, certain characters, maybe I shouldn't name them, certain billionaires or certain corporations or, certain structures of civilization or certain governments having the greatest power with it, well, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So the what I want to say here is, this is why, my latest book I'm really proud of, and I mentioned artificial intelligence in there, but the civilization aspect of it, I figured something out over the last 4 or 5 years about civilization. And that is that when you take global warming, when you take the challenges to democracy, when you take the lack of trust that we have throughout society, when you take the wars that are out there, when you take the bigotry, the false news, the propaganda that comes from all different kinds of powerful sources, it becomes really clear that there's something systemic going on. That it's not just, you can say, well, it's human nature. Well, sure, we've all got that in us. We all have some cunning in us that could be devious or whatever. We all, can be enraged at times. But why is it that at the top of every hierarchy of power, after 250 years since Adam Smith threw us out into the Industrial Revolution, why is it that we don't find the very best of humanity at the top of every hierarchy of power? Our wisdom and our compassion. And there can only be one reason for that, because you don't find it anywhere, and systemically. And that has to be that at the base of our system, there's something slightly off that is facilitating us doing bad things with AI, facilitating the worst of us doing bad things with AI. And it's time for us to clean that up, frankly, James. That's where I am with this all, because AI is not the be all and end all. There's going to be other stuff that's coming along. There's going to be stuff with our biology, with our longevity, with our cells, with our medicine, all kinds of stuff. And of course, we can see the mind control that different organizations try to do with us, with the false news. So there's something at the base. And I think it's really very simple, that we simply never required a corporation or a government or a nonprofit to act humanely. Never. That's not part of the contract. So I've set up a single sentence legislative proposal called Fiduciary in All Things. FIAT, F-I-A-T is the acronym. And it's basically designed to bring trustworthiness and humaneness to every level of society, so that you and I feel, and everybody feels, that the institutions that are so incredible, that fly us from one culture to another, that, give us news and from all over the world, that handle our, with our cell phones, tell us everything about culture and medicine and geography and weather and everything, that every single one of them acts with our interest ahead of their own, with humanity's interest, with democracy, places that ahead of their own interest, self-interest, places the planet ahead of their own self-interest, and most important of all, places the truth ahead of their own self-interest. So if you had that as being kind of the base level, how could AI be a problem? If every institution, and that includes every, billionaire that puts a corporation in front of their face to hide behind, if every corporation was required to be humane fundamentally, how could AI be a problem? How could it be subject to our emotional problems that we all have, little bits of
reactions? Yeah.
So that's what
I think that's hugely interesting, because most of the people that I know are good people. They just want to do good, and it's bizarre, isn't it? Nobody wants a war. Nobody wants all this hatred or this binary, you're red, you're blue. No, nobody wants that. But it's almost like that's the path we seem to be on, because there are vested interests.
Exactly.
But the weird thing is, I always think the majority of people are good people. They just want to do right by their family and friends and just look out for each other. That's great. Why can't we do more of that? So do you think at the moment, just on this subject, that, the term virtue signaling's around, do you think there's too much of perhaps the theatrics around doing good, but the reality is we're not really putting the interests of others ahead? We're saying one thing, but maybe doing another, because sometimes that's my feeling, that companies project an image and it's like, well, you're not really living up to those values. It's like, that's a corporate image, and it's not perhaps what you should be doing. Is that what you feel or see?
Well, I think absolutely there, James. But that points to something else that I think is even more significant and more important. And that is that we got to do something about it. And to some extent, that means you and me. In the book that I've just completed, The Three Domains of Freedom, the third domain is civilization is yours. And what I mean by that is that civilization is who we are. And it's like you're saying, well, most people are really kind, and most people want to do good, and everybody's got their quirks, but mostly people want to do good. So why don't we build that into the system? Let's build it into the system so that people can't do these other things. If we build it into the system so that corporations have to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, how can they do wrong? And if we simply built that in, and that's one of the things, and then support the planet and humanity and democracy as well, I think we've got a very easy solution. It's just, do we have the guts and the courage? And are we willing to realize that as a human species, we have to stand up to these enormous powers that we've created? We've given power. Where did Elon Musk get his power from?
Yeah,
we gave it to him. And he didn't come from power. I mean, we gave it to him. So it's time for us as a human species to realize we can do it differently, and let's do it. Let's make it happen. So support Fiat. Let's go for my website. Come, let's go.
have you got a website for that, George? Because I'm going to take a look at that after this podcast.
My website that has all my stuff on it is called georgekinder.com, and georgekinder.com, and it has the Fiat stuff. It has my new poetry and photography book and the 3 domains of freedom. But I think it's time to have a fiduciary culture. I think that, we have all these human rights that are amazing. We have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought. Why don't we have a freedom for all humanity to know that every institution that we encounter in our life is trustworthy, is supporting our basic values, is supporting our planet, our democracy, ourselves, and the truth. Very simple. That should be a basic human right.
But change comes from within. So we have to make that happen. We have to say this is what the people want,
We do. Yeah. We do.
So certainly look at your website and sign up and take an interest.
Yeah.
But change comes from within. Let's make it happen. Okay. Well, shall we take some questions from the audience then?
Absolutely.
So you don't know these. Okay. So let me get my notes. I'm going to call this part of the segment Kinder Surprise, which will it'll resonate with the UK audience, certainly anyway, with the Kinder Egg. I had problems actually whittling these questions. So these are from people that either done it publicly or done it privately to me. And I'll ask the questions and it'll be interesting to see what your answers are, George. Okay, so we've got 3 questions in line with your 3 questions. Okay. So this is the first one. If George could go back in time, is there anything he'd do differently?
I thought occasionally I get asked that question, and I've thought about it, and I'm always stumped because my primary answer is no. There's nothing. That every time there's an obstacle, this is one of the things in Evoke. Evoke is an acronym. And it's how we do life planning. And in Evoke, you have a vision. And then to that vision, there are all these obstacles. And if the vision is strong enough, if you're passionate enough around your vision, obstacles don't stand in your way. So wherever I've been challenged in some way, I've taken it as an opportunity to grow personally, to become a better person, to do more in the world, to become more accomplished in some way. So I think even in those places where I really flubbed up in some way, it was great. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have learned to be the person that I am.
I think it's a very good answer. I think it's all about learning. Yeah. And those trials and tribulations allow you to learn and experience different things. Okay, so that was question number 1. Question number 2. What would George suggest for the client that struggles to withhold frivolous spending habits, even knowing these habits will inhibit a more full life in retirement?
So there's a number of problems there with the question, just to begin with. First of all, in retirement, what does that mean? I just want to throw that up because I don't by and large believe in retirement. I realize that companies set up structures that have retirement, and there are tax structures in various countries. But so the issue there is, and frivolous, are they frivolous or are they necessary because the person is shaky and needs something to settle themselves down? So I'm raising different kinds of obstacles here, different kinds of solutions. But here's the main thing. The main thing is that if your client, if you can listen well enough to your client, that you can discover with them, and asking the 3 questions can help as well, that you can discover with them what would make an extraordinary life. I don't mean a retirement. I mean an extraordinary life. And that includes retirement. And often it means retirement right now. I mean, it means just living your life. And like the person who moved from 70 hours a week to 40 hours a week. If you can create that passionate a vision, those spending habits will not get in the way. They will either be realized as de minimis or they won't be done. They just simply won't be done because you've got something passionate to go for.
Very good. I think this person needs to go on your course as well.
Yeah, great.
And the final question, this is quite interesting. And I think I know where this person is going with this one. So final question, who is he yet to be and what else does he want to do?
So you've heard me throughout our conversation bring things around to civilization. It's been an incredible, I feel very lucky in my life, and I've done some wonderful things in life planning, mindfulness practice, fabulous to do. And now I've created these books of photography and poetry. So I've lived my life plan, which is pretty incredible. Where I think that there's still work to be done is civilization is still really troubled. And here in America, in this year, 2024, we have a huge election. And I know elections feel huge in the UK and they feel huge in the EU and all of these places. Nobody's talking about something like fiat. Nobody's talking about let's change the basic social contract that we as human beings have with the institutions that kind of are our overlords or our facilitators of great lives. Nobody's talking about that. So I've got a little bit of a bully pulpit. You've given me a go, which is fantastic. And I've got other goes that I'll be doing, throughout the year. I intend over this year to dedicate myself to making 2024 as great a year as we can possibly have here in America and perhaps in the world. And I know that the amount I can do is very, very small, but that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be dedicating myself to that and letting go of my writing for now. Let's make a great world. That's my vision for myself, what I feel needs to happen.
So great answer, George. Let's go for it. You created a movement before.
Yeah.
We can make another one.
There you go.
George, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thank you very much for being my guest, for being very honest, speaking openly. And let's have another one in the future. Let's see how we go.
Wonderful. Thank you, James. Wonderful to be here with you.
Yeah. Thank you, George.